English translation 706 contact Wednesday the 4th of April 2018 21:41 hours.
Just noticed earlier that you called me and said you would be here in a moment, which is why I rushed to get to my office. Be welcome and greetings, Bermunda, as but also you, assuming you are her father.
Yes, it is, and I have only come here so that you will not be startled if someone unknown to you unexpectedly comes into your workroom. Unfortunately, I have to leave right away because I am busy elsewhere, so I want to greet you first and also say goodbye right away. I would like to say that you can communicate with my father in your mother tongue via the language conversion device. But now I have to go.
Well, goodbye and take care. But greetings to you again and also welcome. But what may I call you? And may I also ask your age and the meaning of your name?
My name is Quinto, which has the meaning to be trusted. And I can tell you how old I am, because according to earthly time I was born 761 years ago on Era. And you, Edward, that is your birth name after all, or should I call you Billy?
As you wish.
Then I will do it the way I am comfortable with it at the moment. Good, thanks. Then I wanted to say further that I know about your person and mission, and that our Aran population knows you very well, because much of what you teach from the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life, that is also spread among us. It is true that this teaching has also always been our teaching, but we can still learn much from your works which you also write for us, Plejaren, even if these are only smaller parts of what you finish for our spirit leadership, as is generally known among us.
Thanks, but we do not have to talk about that. But if I may ask, could you please tell me the age of your daughter Bermunda, because I was asked? I forgot to ask her personally. On Earth, many women make a secret of their age, which I think is silly because there is no benefit in it.
My daughter Bermunda is 232 years old. But what you mention now is that on Earth those who...
Women?
Yes, that the women do not want to tell their age. I find that strange, because I cannot see any reason for that.
The reason is false vanity, which is not known among you on Era among women, as I know from various Plejaren. But I do not want to talk about that, because your daughter Bermunda told me that you have been an observer on the American continent at a very early time, and know what makes the United States of America tick. Or rather how it behaves in relation to its own leadership and generally to the world or to foreign policy. This is something that interests me just as much as what insights, experiences and observations you have in this regard, as well as with regard to the European Union, if you also want to express your opinion in this regard and if you are concerned with it at all. And what I am particularly interested in is the current affair with the Russian double spy Sergei Skripal, who, together with his daughter Julia, was poisoned with the poison Novichok. As I read up on the internet, this is what Novichok is all about.
Except from Wikipedia, Novichok, Russian, German, Nulling. English transcription is a group of extremely potent nerve agents and fourth-generation nerve agents that were developed in the Soviet Union from the 1970s onwards, but was still being researched in Russia until at least the 1990s. The term nerve agent, especially for nerve agents, is said to be fundamentally misleading, as actually all nerve agents are sometimes highly viscous liquids, with only a few gases counted as nerve agents. The term nerve agent actually came about because the first chemical warfare agents, such as chlorine etc., were gases against which gas masks were used for protection. And this I may add the following, which I copied from Wikipedia on the internet. It explains a few things that should actually be understood so that human beings know what such toxins actually mean for them if they should come into contact with them. Except from Wikipedia, nerve poisons or neurotoxins are substances that have a damaging effect on nerve cells or nerve tissue even in a small dose. Nerve toxins are a heterogeneous group of substances with a variety of mechanisms of action. The majority of neurotoxins are exogenous and naturally occurring toxins derived from organisms. Some chemical elements are also nerve agents, including heavy metals such as lead, cadmium, mercury, and thallium. The term nerve agent, especially for nerve agents, is misleading because all the nerve agents listed here are sometimes highly viscous liquids and only a few gases are nerve agents. The term originates from the fact that the first chemical warfare agents, such as chlorine, were gases, and gas masks were used to protect against them, which also offer a low level of protection against nerve agents. Endogenous poisoning of nerve cells can occur through stimulus overload and the following excessive release of neurotransmitters excitotoxicity. Most neurotoxins are toxins, that is to say nerve toxins synthesized by living organisms and other organic substances. In the animal kingdom, they are often used for defense or as prey poisons to hunt other animals, or by plants and fungi as protection against feeding. The effect of these substances is mostly based on the interaction of the substances with certain receptors of the nerve cells by triggering them as agonists e.g. nicotine at nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, for blocking them as antagonists e.g. atropine at muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, whereby the transmission of excitation and thus the function of organs is disturbed. Another common mechanism of action is based on the opening or blocking of ion channels, such as the opening of calcium channels by alpha-latrotoxin, the poison of the European black widow, or the blocking of sodium channels by saxitoxin, which is mainly produced by dinoflagellates. The origin of such toxins are, for example, arachnids, scorpions, true widows, snakes, poisonous vipers, fungi, agate alkaloids from adates, ibotenic acid compounds from bulbous plants, psilocybin from silicide species, bacteria, botulinum toxin from Clostridium botulinum, tetanospasmin from Clostridium tetani. The causative agent of tetanus, plants, tropane alkaloids from nightshade plants, other organisms, saxitoxin from dinoflagellates, conotoxins from the corn snail genus Conus. Nerve agents are a class of chemical weapons that act on the transmission of signals in the nerves and between the nerves. These neurotoxins can enter the body through the skin, respiratory system, and orifices and cause severe systemic symptoms that can eventually lead to death. Such symptoms may include severe muscle spasms and seizures, tremors, twitching of muscles, headaches, eye pain, fatigue, confusion, anxiety, tension, nausea with vomiting and diarrhea, uncontrolled urination and defecation, loss of appetite, shortness of breath, unconsciousness, and respiratory paralysis.
What you have read out is really a matter of importance and, moreover, very interesting, to which, however, I cannot give any explanations of my own, because I am not familiar with the connections connected with it and certainly not with chemistry, etc., for my special fields are of a completely different nature. This includes the tasks of observing and assessing political movements and machinations of all domains of all states. By this I mean all departments, such as direct, indirect, open, and secret state leadership and their advisors and lobbyists, as well as the secret services, the entire military system, and the comprehensive economic system. Furthermore, my tasks in this regard also include the observation, assessment, and evaluation of the far-reaching foreign policy, as well as the religious influences of all kinds, which have a feigned, pious, deceitful, and false-tongued effect on all human beings in these departments. In the aforementioned manner I deal with all states on earth, but I specialize particularly in the most important of all forms and facts concerning the United States of America, the European Union, and Russia.
Quinto, you say that religious influences are also brought into all state systems. I can also imagine that, because all religious sectarianism has crept into everything imaginable on earth. But I have a question about this in relation to your daughter Bermunda, because when I spoke to her on the 14th of March, I noticed that she is not very keen on religions, their sects, on religiosity, belief in God and religious faith, etc.
Which you are right about, because Bermunda has been preoccupied with everything that is religion-related since she was a child, be it in terms of a major religion in and of itself, or sects arising from it. And since this subject is an obligatory subject of study among us Plejaren with regard to our psychological education, this subject is taught in all courses of all fields of work. Subject areas, areas of activity, and spheres of activity which also require knowledge of psychology. My field of work also requires this knowledge, which is why I am also knowledgeable about the effects and all the facts relating to religions, belief in God, religious belief and religious sectarianism, etc. So I am also knowledgeable about the emergence and work of religions and sects, the origin of which always and in every case goes back to the authorship of a human being who places himself in the foreground and talks to the audience with suggestive words and impairs and confuses them in their intellect and reason, whereby they become believers in his suggestive influence. And that very many human beings do not understand themselves as the originator of all their thoughts, feelings, decisions, actions, and deeds, but are caught up in a belief that an external and higher power guides them and commands them, etc. So they very quickly accept another human being as a leader and saint and the like, sent by a higher power and might, who suggestively preaches a teaching of faith to them, to which they fall prey, although this is as a rule contrary to truth, reality, understanding, and reason. This happens because intellect and reason and their own thinking are switched off, and they let the teachings and leaders think for them in the opposite way. Consequently, they are no longer able to make their own decisions in order to develop within themselves by their own strength and to create their own inner balance, freedom, justice, and inner peace, and to live out these great values within themselves and also outwardly towards their fellow human beings and nature. Instead of this being done, however, human beings fall prey to the suggestive influence of false teachings and leaders who place themselves in the foreground and like to be admired and adored, so that they are elevated higher and higher and finally put on an equal footing, adored, worshipped, and glorified as messengers of a higher power and might, like a god. But this has always been the case, as I know from our studies and also from the experiences of Bermunda when, through her studies in the earthly past, she had gained the knowledge of very many religious machinations that had influenced her. And especially on earth, she has gained knowledge concerning the origin of religions and explains how already in early times the confused false teachings were spread, which are still being circulated and popularized in the same way as rumors, both by the main religions and also by ever newly emerging confused sects, which put traditional religious delusions into other forms. Old confused teachings, which have become religions and have also given rise to religious sectarianism, were inculcated into the believers suggestively early on, and are still being inculcated today by religious and other doctrinal representatives, so that the diffuse, confused, and unrealistic views and assertions regarding false religious teachings and belief systems will continue to be carried into the future, and the human beings will continue to be lied to and deceived by religious representatives and sect leaders regarding real reality and truth. Unfortunately, it also happened, as I learned and also experienced through the explanations of Bermunda, that on earth also our common teaching of Nocedemion on Era, the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, which was brought by the ancient prophets and which you also teach, was completely falsified by earth humans and became confused religions, from which also many sects emerged. And that this true teaching was not written down by the old prophets themselves was because they had no means to do so, which was also the case with the last two prophets. Also, these two taught only orally, and their disciples were ignorant of reading and writing. With one exception, for with the messenger Emmanuel there was a scribe named Judas Iscarioth, who however recorded more incidents than values of the teaching. Since the prophets could not record or write down the teachings themselves, it was not until many decades after their deaths that the possibility arose for scribes to create written records through extremely poor memories and false interpretations, as well as badly falsified oral traditions and stories. In the process, these also fell prey to new falsifications through their own interpretations, which were introduced by the scribes into their writings. Thus it could happen that the old prophets, against their will, were unintentionally elevated to the status of founders of religions after their death, although this was in fact absolutely not in their sense. Just as our population on Era was made aware of our Plejaran mission with you before you were born, since then our attention has also been drawn again and again to all the monstrous criminal events on Earth, which have been staged and carried out since the emergence of Earth humans through their delusion of faith in higher forces and powers, in deities and other similar or similarly directed nonsense, have cost countless human lives, continue to be staged, and will also cost the lives of countless human beings in the future. Before I came to you, it was explained to me by Quetzal that you work in a special way with regard to your mission, and that you yourself record in writing the teachings to be spread. So he explained the following to me, this time under the sign of truth. You, the new and last herald from the Nocodemian line, are to prevent that on Earth, through lies and deceit as well as through intentional or unintentional falsifications. The teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life is once again mutilated with regard to authenticity, truth, and reality through religious and sectarian degenerations and manipulated into religious delusion systems. Everything has been prepared for this, in that from the earliest time of your birth you have been taught by our Plejaran authorities, trained and made well-versed in language, writing, and many other values, through which you have also learned many skills, and you have prepared yourself for your mission. I have also arranged for all the necessary technical developments to take place on Earth, through which you can fulfill your work, and this time write down and spread the teaching yourself, interpreting it, unadulterated and true to the original. Only through this can falsifications no longer be possible, which, however, requires for the learning human beings that when they learn the teaching, they study and evaluate it only in your original version of your language. This necessity exists because foreign renditions and interpretations would also lead to new falsifications, just as translations into other languages do, which is why this time your original written version in your language is indispensable. But now this. So I know that religious, political, economic, philosophical, military, as well as secret service sects, etc., exist as smaller religious communities with a hierarchical structure, whereby their views, beliefs, actions, and behavior are very often extremely degenerate, radical against all human rights, humanity and freedom, peace as well as against reality and truth, deviant and alien. As they also absolutely contradict the basic ethical values, common human sense, reason, and behavior true to reality, as well as the right of every personal freedom of the sect believers. Sects correspond to degenerations whose followers can be religiously, philosophically, or politically, but also criminally, or economically founded and oriented. Religious, political, and philosophical sectarianism is practiced by groups which, in accordance with their delusions of faith, trigger and spread contagious mass delusions contrary to real reality and thus also contrary to its incontrovertible and only truth. Sectarian groups differ from each other and also from themselves by their false teachings, actions, deeds, and opinions, as well as their cults or rituals, etc., as well as by all other prevailing confused, false, and contradictory opinions and convictions, and are usually in conflict with other sects, etc. but especially with regard to the fact that they are completely alien to reality and its truth, defensive, pathologically confused, and rejecting. Religious sects correspond to a religious community split off from a main or mother religion, whereby the originally value-neutral expression, which in Roman times referred to a following, party, or school, has acquired a religious character due to the history and shaping of religions and consequently also of religious linguistic usage. Our knowledge in this respect is that religious sects are more radical, more fanatical, and more alienated from reality than the actual main or mother religions from which sectarianism results. I must explain that we Pleiaren judge and understand main religions and religious sects as the origin of a morbid, groundless madness of a perverse obsession with faith, which is deeply rooted in human consciousness and paralyses and disables understanding and reason through an impairing malignant misguidance. From this arises a confusion of consciousness which makes it impossible for the human being to distinguish reality from unreality, whereby he is prevented from thinking, deciding and acting for himself and, in addition, through the suggestive persuasions of preachers, becomes dependent on religions and sects, dependent on them and becomes a blind believing, obstinate and intolerant believer in what he builds up and practices in his consciousness as a delusion of religion and sectarianism. In this way, the human being who is addicted to faith becomes obsessed and dogmatic, as well as obstinate and unteachable, as a result of which he may even become a blind, fanatical advocate of his delusion of faith and unhesitatingly resort to violence and even murder, kill and destroy in order to advocate his fanatical delusion of faith and to live up to it. In all forms existing in this respect, the believer becomes and is in himself and outwardly in many ways contradictory, full of falsehood, discord, unfreedom, hatred, revengefulness, quarrelsomeness, and warmongering. And when he comes to the fore in these forms, then out of it comes everything up to evil fanaticism. Real truth, the right to life, peace, freedom, humanity, and justice, as well as all other values, are of no importance to a human being caught up in religious faith when acts of war, hatred, revenge, retaliation, jealousy, or punishment, etc., are at hand. For at such moments the religious delusion regarding love, justice, and forgiveness no longer applies, but only the urge for bloodshed, retaliation and destruction, etc. The unreal nature of religious faith corresponds to a profound delusion which human beings who are addicted to religious or sectarian faith believe to be the only and correct truth, even if they suffer suffering, pain, and many evils as a result, because their delusion of faith makes them believe that everything is willed by God and that they will be tested or punished by this delusion. The real truth is not recognized by a believer in religion, but he is so addicted to untruth that he champions it to the point of self-destruction, because his faith has completely degenerated and he is intertwined with it and caught up in it in such a way that he accepts even the worst torture and his own death for it. But as far as my daughter Bermunda is concerned, it must be said that she has spent a great deal of time over the last 11 decades and up to the present day in studying the religious histories of Earth humans without a single gap. In doing so, she has also undertaken a large number of journeys to past times on Earth and to places of the various spreads of religion, and in doing so has directly witnessed and experienced many abominable, gruesome, and horrible religious degenerations on the spot of the events, which has led her to her rejection behavior towards religions and sects, religious faith and belief in God, etc., which is certainly to be understood and of right.
I can understand that. Then another question. Can you say something regarding the poison attack on the ex-double spy Sergei Skripal?
I can give you information about that, give you explanations, and inform you, so also about the connections between the matter mentioned regarding the ex-spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter. However, according to our directives, I have to insist that the information in this regard must remain with you, which you can and will very well comply with when you are asked to do so, as I was assured by Ptah in various conversations.
Good, and thanks. But what is really behind this poison attack, and do you have any intelligence in this regard?
That is indeed the case, because the investigation of such incidents is also one of my tasks. And since I have also fulfilled my duty in this way, the realization has arisen that this poison attack is based on a far-reaching devious plot and malicious intrigue of who are in the service of this, however, rekindles and reignites the conscienceless and time-honored enmity and hatred of the Western states against Russia, as has always been the case since time immemorial, also in the Soviet era and throughout the Cold War period. And the fact that the Russian state itself is also being betrayed in this way is not recognized without understanding and reason. The authors of this intrigue are not aware of the consequences of their actions because their lack of intellect does not permit this. The attack perpetrated on Sergei Skripal and his daughter is based in an insidious and dastardly manner on the as well as and is very stupid in this way, which damages Russia and President Putin, as it also damages Russia itself. First and foremost, however, President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, as well as the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov, are made impossible in the Western world by this matter, but also the Russian ambassador to the UN, as well as others, which can further have the consequence that the state of Russia itself is completely isolated against the entire West.
Very unpleasant and, moreover, hastily acted.
Yes, it is unpleasant, but what does your remark, hastily, mean?
There is a whole range of linguistic expressions for this in relation to action that is also anarchic. Rash, agitated, blind, loopy, dumb-witted, thoughtless, shabby, annoyed, wheeled, confused, headless, enervated, disorganized, senseless, imprudent, untidy, mad, stressed, bewildered, hasty, muddled, erratic, hurried, overloaded, rushed, immature, and distraught, etc. is called.
Thanks for the explanation.
Since observation and judgment in relation to the United States of America, Russia, and the European Union is your special task, I would like to hear from you what you have to say and judge on this.
The United States of America and the European Union proclaim themselves to be democracies. But this assertive self-portrayal must not be judged truthful, because it is built on a popularly deceiving, popularly dulling, and truth-obscuring lie. The fact and the truth are that both state structures, both the United States of America and the European Union, each correspond to a devious dictatorship. All state officials of every department act high-handedly and outside the will of that part of the people who decide clearly and reasonably and act thoughtfully and who strive for peace, equality for all, but also for justice and real freedom, for just governance, state responsibility and its exercise, as well as for real democracy and for the fact that it is not the state powers alone. Their advisors, followers, the military leaders, secret services, as well as the economic magnates, but only the people who decide and determine. But all this is not understood and not recognized by a part of the peoples concerned, because they have no knowledge of what is to be understood by democracy, peace, justice, and real freedom, as well as responsibility of state leadership. Consequently, they willingly follow the unfit state leaders and all the forces of all departments belonging to them, because they allow themselves to be beguiled and persuaded by words in their instability, their undermined intellect, in their lack of reason, as well as in their lack of self-decision-making ability. But if I now have to explain what needs to be said with regard to the United States of America, its foreign policy and its real multifaceted endeavors, then this paints a very unpleasant picture that could give the impression that the entire U.S. American people are to be slandered, denounced and betrayed, or in other words, blackened, denigrated, maligned, exposed, and disgraced. This, however, does not correspond to the meaning and truth of my statements, nor is it intended to create hatred against the U.S. American people. The truth of my statements refers only, and really only, to the fact that the whole unpleasant and negative assessment of the attitude of the entire U.S. American system of government is addressed, in which the state leaders, their advisors, the lobbyists and the entire politics, the secret services and economy, the religious system and the military power, but also that part of the U.S. people whose attitudes conform equally to what corresponds to the entire striving, leadership, financial, and power behavior of the U.S. leadership and the associated powers of all departments. The U.S. American population, that is to say, the human beings, are not attacked with my explanations, statements, and declarations, but only the attitudes and the executions and the committing of wrong actions. Deeds and behaviors are mentioned, which are founded in intrigues, deceptions, deceitfulness, and criminal manipulations and conspiracies, which lead up to torture, murder, and war. This is because on the part of the government, with the entire apparatus of all branches of power, criminal planning and action is being taken in violation of peace, freedom, justice, and order, international law, human rights, and the law, and in a way that is unlawful, criminal, unlawful, and vile. Everything corresponds to an attitude and an action, conduct and deed which can only be described as shameful, reprehensible, and contemptible, abominable, ignoble, dishonorable, nefarious, and evil. But what must now be explained with regard to the question concerning the United States of America is the following. The USA keeps all the regional states of the earth under its dominating supervision under strict control, whereby these cannot develop further, cannot strive higher, and cannot determine themselves, but are as good as dependents and vassals of the USA, which imagines itself to be the only world power and wants to exist in this way with all its dishonest infiltrations. For this reason, the USA does not want peace, but hates it and does everything to keep all the states under its control down with the same means of oppression and to keep them small and unable to act for themselves. The USA intervenes actively in the affairs of other states under its control, politically, financially, as well as militarily, secretly, economically, and even religiously, when this seems necessary and beneficial, but it also interferes everywhere in foreign problems and circumstances which are none of its business. In doing so, however, they are tormented by the constant fear that other states, especially Russia and China, might give them politically, militarily, secretly, diplomatically, and economically damaging competition. And also that certain government leaders of other states, such as Russia in particular, might undertake efforts towards world peace and also encourage other states to do so. This miserable fear, anxiety, and threat of the U.S. American rulers, military and secret services have existed since the foundation of the United States of America, among various other profoundly low, unprofessional, and empty motives, and have always caused all those in charge to thwart any peace efforts that have been undertaken in numerous states on Earth since ancient times and are still being renewed today in the third millennium. Since the United States of America has been in existence, it has not allowed peace to come about among the peoples of Earth, for it does not want peace but hates it, because on the one hand it is afraid of losing the far-reaching power it has built up on Earth, and on the other hand because it would have to give up its striving for world domination. From the U.S. side, everything violent is done and undertaken at all costs against peace on Earth and with regard to their desire for world domination. And this is being done first and foremost according to the power-driven will of those responsible for the government, the military, the secret services, and the economic powers, but also according to the will of that section of the population which is dependent on the government, the secret services, and the economy, and absolutely against the will of that minority of the population which is striving for peace and freedom with reason and intellect, and is also making efforts to achieve this with appeals and peaceful demonstrations, etc. The incontrovertible fact is, because the USA neither want nor strive for a far-reaching nor a worldwide peace, and also no true freedom, but want to seize world domination, that there is absolutely no will to bring about an actually truthful abandonment of nuclear physics, just as no responsibility and no interest can arise with regard to an end to the further development of even more dangerous and destructive and ultimately all-destroying nuclear weapons. So there are also no efforts for nuclear disarmament, in order to free the Earth in honest and reasonable cooperation with all other nuclear powers from this world existence-threatening scourge of fear and destruction, which was created by the USA and used nefariously and criminally in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and since then has been constantly developed further and up to the present time has become a danger of planetary destruction and human extinction. This, while also in their own country sacrilegiously and reprehensibly crimes were committed against their own ignorant population by ordering their own military, actors, internees, and private persons, etc., into areas, letting them in and deliberately contaminating them with radiation by exposing them to atomic experiments with atomic bomb tests and contaminating them with radiation. Of course, it could not fail that through espionage and scientists, other states also took up nuclear research and developed nuclear weapons of various kinds, thus creating further nuclear powers and also the danger of an all-destroying and all-devastating nuclear war. And this danger has persisted to this day, and it has even been rekindled by the new hostilities of the United States of America and the dictatorship of the European Union, as well as various supporters of these two dictatorships, as a result of the hateful and hostile machinations against Russia. Despite the partial disarmament of nuclear weapons, the threat and danger of the use of nuclear weapons and thus of nuclear war, triggered by the nuclear powers in armed conflicts, but also by extreme terrorist organizations in possession of nuclear weapons, is very great. Moreover, all the nuclear powers still have more nuclear weapons than is officially admitted, although not even this larger number of nuclear weapons would be necessary to destroy and even annihilate the Earth to such an extent that all life on the planet would be destroyed and none could exist anymore. Just a small part of the officially known and existing nuclear arsenal of the largest nuclear powers would be completely sufficient for this. But to stay with the United States of America, of which I speak with regard to your questions, it is to be said that in view of all the facts mentioned so far alone, it can be stated that the hostility to peace and the hatred of peace, as well as the permanent addiction to world domination of the rulers of the USA and their supporters from the population, will be carried far into the future. The irresponsible and power-wielding part of the state leaders, as well as their incompetent advisors, secret services, and economic powers, etc., but also that part of the power-obsessed and war-mongering elements of the military leaders and military-obsessed from the population of the United States of America, persist in the same delusion as was the case at the early times of the formation of this multi-state structure. Even then, many outlaws committed serious crimes. Just as many state officials acted criminally because they were just as shamed, conscienceless, and criminal-minded as many of their successors up to the present time. Already in early times, the rulers in the USA exercised their power and abused the trust towards that part of the population which was straightforward, capable, and blameless, as is still the case today, but as will also be the case far into the future, also in undemocratic other states of the earth. Unfortunately, since time immemorial, the peace-seeking minority of the U.S. population has never had a chance to intervene in politics in order to achieve a political turn towards peace with good, correct, and peace-demanding interventions. Even demonstrations demanding peace never achieved anything because they were not only disregarded by the rulers, military, security forces, and secret services, but ridiculed or stopped with violence. The people striving for peace as a minority in the United States of America never had a chance of ever achieving success, as was and is also the case everywhere else in the earth. Therefore, only the rulers of the state and their allied military secret services, security forces, and that part of the population which unanimously agrees with the machinations of the state leaders and their fellow travelers and consents in every way to all their manipulations, always win. This, while the smaller part of the population, which thirsts for harmony, peace, freedom, justice, reconciliation, and solidarity with all peoples and states, and is righteous, is fundamentally disregarded in spite of many pacifist efforts or, under certain circumstances, is even harassed and punished by the security forces and those who obey the rulers. In the same way as it happens in the United States of America, it also happens through the European dictatorship headquarters in Belgium, as well as in the states affiliated to it, whose governments and peoples are ruled by the European dictatorship and who in turn dictatorially impose strife and lack of freedom on their peoples. But also in many other states, the same picture and events arise because the peoples, due to their psychological cluelessness and lack of knowledge of human nature, allow themselves to be misled, impressed and deceived by false, deceitful, and lying promises, hypocrisies, and pretenses of false facts by candidates standing for election to government and other state offices. And this happens because the candidates for state offices, etc., conceal their true, lowly, ruling and power-seeking sentiments behind false friendly, deceiving and beguiling gestures. Facial expressions, gesticulations, and facial expressions, and vow with false words of honor and promises to do only the very best for the people if they were elected to the office in question. And this they do, although they are completely of the opposite mind and unwilling to keep and fulfill their promises if elected to their offices. As a rule, the candidates for government positions and other state offices, etc., who appear in this way are only concerned with gaining and exercising power, and thus with being able to rule over their fellow human beings or the people. Another kind of human beings who seek candidature for governmental and state offices is probably of good and honest mind and will to do their best for the government, the people and the leadership of the state, as well as for peace, justice, and freedom, and to do this honestly and well with all the means and opportunities at their disposal. However, if they then get into their elected office, then everything changes for them in a negative way, because on the one hand, they are either suggestively redirected by their internal collaborators, advisors, leaders, and dominators, etc., to their dominating power behavior and brought to their sense and will. Consequently, they then act in the same power way and also behave accordingly. On the other hand, however, it is possible that honorable persons who have been elected to corresponding state offices, who have all the good intentions for a righteous conduct in office and are also willing to reliably and trustworthily carry them through and implement them, are not given any chance whatsoever to carry through their intentions and aspirations. The possession of nuclear weapons never gives a reason to assume a hostile military threat by other states. To maintain this threat assumption and to claim fatuously as well as illogically and foolishly that in return only with own threats and a dangerous nuclear arsenal peace security can be guaranteed. It is rational and reasonable to consider and understand that neither small nor large stockpiles of nuclear and conventional weapons can be a guarantor of security and peace, but only a guarantee that such weapons will be used without hesitation and that populations will be murdered. An immense destruction wrought if any conflicts with combat weapons take place irresponsibly or even if wars are instigated. And such weapons of all kinds are produced especially in great masses in the United States of America and sold to many states, whereby, however, only those are taken into account which, on the one hand, can be made politically, militarily, and economically dependent on the USA through the purchase of weapons, but which, on the other hand, also become a guarantee that the U.S. Americans striving for unrestricted world domination can be maintained. So also the arms sales practiced by the USA all over the world, as well as many other things, correspond to devious intrigues which serve the purpose of striving for a world-dominating might through all kinds of intrigues, cross-directions, plots, infiltrations, subversions, government overthrows, criminal Secret Service operations, and fraud maneuvers, as well as cunning manipulations, etc., for the United States of America. The use of military G-Vault has always been and is also today, tomorrow, and in the as-yet unforeseeable future an option. Another, peaceful and free alternative would be diametrically opposed to the foreign policy that has been orchestrated and carried out for many years and since the existence of the USA, which has always ensured that U.S. America can assert its political, military, and economic interests in an international manner, as well as its world-dominating tendencies. The fact is that it is not the USA that has to be afraid of enemies. Due to its arsenal of war weapons and its military and air force, it is too powerful to be attacked by smaller states. Consequently, only another great power would have a chance against it. But many states of the world have to be afraid of the USA, namely of the invasion attempts, that is to say, the violent invasions of the USA. They must also be afraid of possible annexation maneuvers or forced final incorporation under the rule of the United States of America caused by wars or any underhanded political, military, and Secret Service infamous U.S. machinations. Of course, it is the case that the state and military powers, the secret services and those responsible for the economy, their advisors and other fellow travelers deny everything in this respect just as cholerically, energetically and bitterly as that part of the population which is in every respect in bondage to these irresponsible people in state positions and, moreover, is completely ignorant of their real far-reaching secret machinations striving for world domination and the intrigues connected with it. The USA is ready at any time, if it is of use to them or if it is a matter of their so-called state security, to brand foreign states as alleged bad guys without hesitation and to attack and completely destroy them under certain circumstances. And as it has happened in various countries since time immemorial, President George Walker Bush, who branded various states as the axis of evil, let the U.S. Army invade Iraq with tremendous spreading of lies, as his equally bellicose father George Herbert Walker Bush did before him during the First Gulf War. And as usual with the USA regarding their world power ambitions, it remained and remains the case that once they have invaded a country, they keep it occupied for all time or impose their U.S. demands, intrigues, policies, and, if possible, their laws, etc., on the respective states. In this way, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was also deposed and executed. If the morality of those in charge of the state, the military powers, the secret services, and the economic powers of the USA is considered, as well as the majority of those in charge of many other states, then it is clear and undoubted that all irresponsible people among those in charge, can always find an argument for an attack, etc., on other countries, even for a nuclear attack, and this without any prior provocation of the state in question that is to be invaded. This is fact, whether it wants to be understood or not, because this is the true side of U.S. foreign policy. All honorable, righteous, and responsible human beings of all states of the earth striving for peace and freedom are unfortunately in the minority, because a part of each people has fallen into the indifference and bondage of the state officials, and the other state forces of all shapes and sizes, and these do not take their responsibility for state leadership and state security as well as for the creation of peace, but act and work completely irresponsibly in the opposite direction, and this also against the welfare of the population. Therefore, it is also of no use if the reasonable human beings striving for peace unite and try, through peaceful demonstrations, to relax the governments and their entire hostile state apparatuses by demanding peace. So it is of no use if the minority of the population demonstratively formulates the wish to end the formal hostilities that have existed among human beings since time immemorial. Therefore, on Earth and with its humanity, the attainment of comprehensive peace can only be a very long-term goal, which all states can only approach very slowly through reason and rationality, and in doing so must be mindful of and learn to proceed in harmony and peacefully, and to walk together in good, without strife, non-violently, amicably, conciliatorily, and agreeably. However, all earthly states and a part of the populations have always stood in the way of this goal, with the USA standing out particularly in this respect, which must make a great effort to become reasonable and give up its desire for world power in order to bring about peace for the world instead of fighting it as it has done up to now. Unfortunately, however, the USA is not making any effort in this respect, but is doing everything in the opposite sense to create enmity in the world among all states and peoples on the one hand, and on the other hand to continue its desire for world domination by all evil means and intrigues. A peaceful unification of all states and peoples is not in the interest of U.S. foreign policy, but only the effort and desire to accelerate the achievement of world domination. And there is no doubt whatsoever that this will always involve vicious armed force, as has been proven time and again since time immemorial, whereby even supposedly good and moderate U.S. leaders ultimately based all their actions and deeds on violence, war, and the U.S. weapons potential. This is what even the supposedly oh-so-sane President Barack Obama let slip when he threatened at the 60th anniversary of the Korean War armistice to let the war beasts off the leash if necessary, in something like the following threatening words: "The United States of America will maintain for all time by far the most powerful military the world has ever known." Yes, we most certainly will. And this statement probably proves very well the true sentiments of the USA, as is also made clear by the fact that Obama at that time prevented the disagreements prevailing between North and South Korea from being settled, and how the so much peace-loving and reasonable Barack Obama spoke and acted at that time, completely contrary to all his election promises. The same picture emerges also at the present time, when the stupidly insolent warmongering threats, speeches, demands, and confused orders, as well as the irresponsible actions and deeds of the U.S. President Donald John Trump, are closely examined and judged. If the global situation is viewed and understood from a U.S. perspective, then it is very easy to see that the United States of America is an overwhelming political, economic, intelligence, and military, and thus also armed strong might, which it uses to make more and more states and peoples around the world dependent on the U.S. and to dominate them underhandedly. And they also use this might, on the one hand, to further expand their sphere of influence throughout the world, and, on the other hand, to prevent any other competing powers from getting ahead of them in their striving for world domination. But they also use their power to prevent the states in question from working their way up and attaining power of their own. These are the three most important reasons for the United States of America to intervene politically, militarily, economically, and commercially in various countries around the world again and again, as well as to carry out secret service actions and to cause unrest in foreign states. This would be the most important reason for all states and peoples of the earth to make peaceful and reasonable efforts to restrict and control the United States of America in its criminal actions and deeds in this regard and in its delusion of addiction to world domination. This, however, would require all states and peoples to stand together in unity and to act together in a peaceful manner in this regard, because it is impossible that one state and people alone could achieve anything to induce the USA to a peace process. Ongoing attempts in this regard alone are useless, as are unilateral alliances with the USA that are only aimed at their advantage, because such alliances are in any case doomed to failure in terms of peace and freedom for the sole benefit of the USA, and thus for world peace and freedom. The truth should finally be recognized that the foreign policy of the United States of America not only interferes with any attempt to create world peace and freedom, but will never allow them to come about globally, which is why they continue their intrigues. And they do this by not allowing weaker states to emerge, but first supporting them in many ways, only to then again surreptitiously and unnoticeably contain and weaken them when they have developed according to the guidelines and formal agreements given to them for the benefit of the USA. The intrigues for the purpose of achieving the set goal are manifold and range from trade sanctions to supporting rivals and creating new U.S. bases in suitable riparian areas. Then it finally comes to this, because it is necessary for the U.S. to gain power in the state in question. That first relatively small specialized U.S. troops of various disciplines are infiltrated into the country in question in order to block its own might, destabilize it, and surreptitiously bring the whole region under U.S. control.
And that's probably what, in my estimation of the guy's mindset, the psychopathic and ungovernable oaf Trump will irresponsibly continue to do and stage, in my opinion, all sorts of other idiotic and moronic things as well. What he promised, that the USA would withdraw from interfering in foreign countries' affairs. If he and the USA had done that, then he would have been a good president in that respect alone, has not been mentioned for a long time. But contrary to this promise, Trample Trump, together with his advisors, the lobbyists and his other hangers-on as well as the EU dictatorship, is interfering in the matter of the poison attack against the Russian ex-double spy Skripal and, together with the dictators and dictators of the EU dictatorship, is stirring up new hatred against Russia. And he does this by going along with the dictatorship and various other states as they expel Russian diplomats from the USA, block Russian businessmen's bank money in the USA and other nonsense like imposing idiotic sanctions against Russia, etc. He is also playing idiotic and dangerous games with the psychopathic unadult child-headed North Korea boss, Kim Jong-un, and playing the strong man, as he is also playing crazy against Mexico in terms of building a wall and detaching the army or the National Guard, and also proving with all his imbecilic decrees that he is purely useless as a headbird in the form of a head of state.
There is more I could say, but the time has come for me to return to my duties and take my leave. I will be happy to visit you again, though.
I would be happy to do that, and it can also be purely private, because we can also talk in that way, just without discussing any things that should be recorded.
That is how it should be. So goodbye then, Edward, or also Billy, although I think I will stick with those two names alternately.
Goodbye too, and see you again next time.